So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final roundtable of our international conference. Roundtable, which is traditionally oriented to have a more practitioner perspective on the key themes of the conference, and we have a panel of experts from different professional perspectives, which will address the key themes that we have been addressing yesterday, maybe for a more academic perspective. I'm very glad to share the management of this panel with my dear colleague from the Global Campus of Human Rights, Orla Cheallacháin, correct? Okay, thank you. I studied the pronunciation from yesterday evening. I would like to give a special welcome to a group of high school students from the Liceo Scientifico Paolo Lioi in Vicenza and their teacher, Rita. Thank you very much for being here. We are very pleased that you managed to be with us, and I think this is a great example of the will of youth to be engaged in the discussion, the debates that really deal with our everyday challenges as far as human rights are concerned. They are part of a project called Percorsi di Pace e Gestione dei Conflitti, in English, Peace Path and Conflict Management. I have to apologize. One of our panelists is not with us. Nello Scavo is a reporter for Avvenire. Everything was set, but his newspaper sent him for an investigation report in some areas of conflict just yesterday, so he couldn't come and we couldn't amend the program. But we have an excellent panel with a lot of expertise, and maybe we also deal with the issue of media and communication as far as human rights are concerned. So I give now the floor to my colleague Orla, and we start with the roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, Pietro, and thank you for having me here. As Pietro said, my name is Dr. Orla Cheallacháin, and I'm the director of the European Master's Programme in Human Rights and Democratization at the Global Campus of Human Rights. So I'm very excited to be co-chairing this panel with Pietro. We had a very rich and many rich discussions yesterday where we were talking about the current research and academic perspectives on the contemporary challenges that we're facing at the moment in a world that is in flux. But as Pietro said, we're shifting gears a little bit and hearing from practitioners today. And this is a very important perspective, I feel, because it's very easy to diagnose and to say, this is the problem, that's the problem, this is what's working, what's not working. But at the end of the day, we're engaged in activities that have real life impacts across the world. So I'm very happy to be here co-chairing with Pietro and to hear our speakers this morning. So we're going to introduce the speakers one by one. They'll speak for about 10 minutes and then we'll move on to the next speaker. Then we have a few questions prepared, so we'll have a bit of a discussion up here on stage, and then towards the end we'll have time for questions from the floor. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, Martina Pignatti Morano from Ponte, who is the executive director of Ponte, where she's focused on supporting social movements in the Middle East. Her work has involved organizing training sessions on human rights and active non-violence in countries including Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, and Ukraine. And she's also held many positions in various peace-oriented organizations. She's the national representative of the Civil Peace Interventions Table and an active member of the Italian Peace and Disarmament Network, where she organizes campaigns to strengthen civil peace building and support disarmament policies. And currently she's the chair of the ethics committee of Banco Popolare Etica, where she teaches peace building and peace building courses with the University of Pisa. So highly qualified to speak on this subject today. Martina, please, over to you.
Thanks for inviting me, and I really apologize for not being able to attend the sessions yesterday. In fact, it would have been a great learning opportunity for me. And I hope I can bring the perspective today of those who are struggling at grassroots level in conflict areas to promote peace and human rights, and also positive peace, meaning, conditions of respect of basic human rights, human needs, decent humanitarian conditions for people to operate, and then decide to spend their time to struggle for human rights and promote peace building. So as it was explained in my introduction, on Ponte is an NGO that was born from the Italian peace movement. That was the peace movement against the war in Iraq in 1991. And since then, we've always been working on humanitarian action in conflict areas whenever it's needed. Development as much as possible, and peace building and conflict prevention always. This is the explanation given by the multilateral system, by OECD, approved by the United Nations, of how international NGOs, the UN system should work in the triple nexus between humanitarian action, development, and peace building. And the crisis of the multilateral order implies that those of us who are following this good practice of working in the triple nexus are now uncomfortable agents to deal with for many governments. So the first thing I'd like to say is that today we are being questioned. And in conflict areas, governments do not really appreciate the fact that NGOs may distance themselves from the pure humanitarian actors that deliver aid, promote and defend health, protect vulnerable women and children and individuals. And governments find it difficult to deal with those who also do advocacy to defend human rights, those who promote non-violent action, non-violent tools for conflict transformation. And I was telling my friend Issa, I was questioned last week by one of these governments, and they asked me, but who are you? Are you a humanitarian actor or are you an activist? And I was trying to explain that all humanitarian organizations were born from activists, from people who were trying to work for social justice, who were feeling that the suffering in Palestine, in Iraq, in Ukraine is our suffering, just because of a universal, conception of fundamental rights. And then, of course, we can decide to work on humanitarian action. We can make it our mission. But still, our work is to try to bring the solidarity of the international community to people who are suffering because of the failure of the international community to prevent and deal with armed conflicts by nonviolent means. We are working to heal the wounds of those who bear on the skin the implications of failures of diplomacy. And this is becoming a very difficult job. So very practically, in Baghdad, in Damascus, in Kiev, earlier, we felt supported by the UN system. The strongest representatives of the UN system in those capitals were defending our space to exist, the space for civil society to do its job. Not only physically, like protecting human rights defenders from threats and attacks, but also ideologically, let's say, in terms of the way we frame and the way we explain our work to authorities so that they don't feel threatened. We are not a threat for authorities. We are defending the well-being and the human rights of the people. And the fact that we don't have a strong UN system backing us means that each of us, in the end, each single NGO, at times each single human rights defender has to defend its right to exist almost individually in front of governments. Many networks of international and national NGOs have been dismantled. Namely, you know? You have to register to operate in those countries as an organization, or you have to register as a network. Networks are being dismantled. So the registration is canceled so that they cannot do advocacy anymore. So this is one thing. The other thing is a very easy tool to weaken our operations, subtract our funding. So you may have heard that there has been a very significant cut of funding for international cooperation by the current American administration. Trump this year issued order to stop the operations of billions of dollars of international cooperation programs. This means that for all over the world, so the last estimates I've read is that for all over the world, the decrease in humanitarian aid for the most vulnerable areas of this country has been of 51%. So more than half of the total amount of money that was going to the most vulnerable people has been cut. And if you look at the numbers, they're really very concerning. So all health programs, which are supposed to be the most essential ones for survival, you know, pure survival, all the health programs worldwide in areas of need have been cut by 32%. All funds for reproductive health, okay, have been cut by 40%. So this means, in terms of also the reaction of multilateral order, so this cut is affecting both UN agencies and multilateral organizations and directly NGOs who are receiving this funding from donors. And it's not only about the US. Germany is cutting as well, dramatically, more than 30%. And most other countries are doing so. So in this situation, for example, UN agencies who were used to work with civil society, subcontracting civil society organizations to do the job with the UN, are now increasingly doing the job with their own staff. And because funding has diminished and they don't want to dismantle the UN agencies, so they are increasingly doing it with their own staff rather than involving civil society. So the programs are becoming less participatory and less grassroots because the rules of engagement, of staff from the UN do not really allow them to be walking through cities and in the countryside in fragile countries as many local NGOs, for example. So it is becoming difficult to operate, and this requires a stronger alliance between those who analyze the scope, the dynamics, the meaning of what we do, like universities, like Centro Diritti Umani of University of Padova, and practitioners and institutions. So we need to go back and recover the reasons, the concepts, why we are doing this job, because times will change. But we have to resist and survive before they change to the best. And with this, I think I close my first speech. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Martina, for this first part of the discussion that we're going to have. Our second speaker is Madiha Farid. Madiha is a communication and human rights professional currently working with the United Nations Development Programme, the UNDP, as a human rights officer for Punjab region. And she works at the intersection of policy, right-based advocacy and strategic partnership, liaising with government, counterparts, civil society, and international organizations to advance inclusive governance and rights-based development. She has also had impactful roles for the Office of the Cooperation for Humanitarian Affairs, the UN OCHA, World Health Organization, the Red Cross, and the National Commission for Human Rights. Mahit, you have the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Pietro and Orla, and thank you to the University of Padua Human Rights Center for not just inviting me, but for creating a space that where honesty feels possible, something that we do not have the luxury of back home. It's truly an honor and privilege to be here today, sharing the panel with my esteemed colleagues. So my name is Madiha Farid, as Pietro mentioned, and I work as a human rights officer with the UNDP Pakistan. I work specifically on a EU-funded program which is called Huqooq-e-Pakistan, which literally translates to the rights of Pakistanis. So my work is not with communities directly, it's with the institutions that are supposed to protect human rights. We work with the provincial and national departments and with the national human rights institutions. We try to help the state fulfill its human rights mandate. And we also work on business and human rights and on integrating human rights education and to build a culture of uh, a discourse to engage a more independent discourse on human rights. Because my work is inside the system, it's inside bureaucracy in rooms where decisions are supposed to be made and not outside of it. So my perspective is shaped by a very strange contradiction. Every day I sit in rooms full of language about rights, commitment, reforms, while outside those rooms, people are losing the very rights that we are discussing. In the past few years, I have seen civic space in Pakistan shrink to a level that would have been once unimaginable. People have been detained for peaceful expression, journalists are silenced, citizens weigh every sentence before speaking. Civil society has been intimidated into safe activism only. Democracy feels like a process and more feels less like a process and more like a set stage, a facade with the appearance of choice without the substance of participation. Political violence and political victimization has become business as usual. And when this happens, you expect multilateral institutions, especially the ones that talk loudly about human rights, to speak, even if they do not intervene, at least speak. But the most difficult part is not repression, it's the silence around it, especially from institutions that claim to care about human rights. To understand why that silence hurt, you, you need some context, and that brings me to the EU. So Pakistan is a beneficiary of the EU GSP Plus scheme. In return, we commit, Pakistan gains access to preferential access to the European trade market. And in return, we commit to implementing 27 international conventions, which include 7 core human rights treaties. Along with that, EU also invests heavily in large programs to strengthen human rights institutions and governance, including the one that I'm currently working in, which is the largest human rights program in the country at the moment. So on paper, relationship between Pakistan and EU is built on rights conditionality. Human rights are not charity, they are a precondition for trade and access to European market. But that's the theory. In reality, in 2024, Pakistan held general elections and there were grave allegations of interference and suppressions. And they're regarded as the worst rigged elections in the history of the country. And as a standard practice, the European Union deployed an election observant mission in Pakistan. They collected data, they observed irregularities, and they talked to people, record testimonies, and then the final report was never released. It's been over 2 years, and EU still refuses to release that report. No acknowledgement, just strategic quiet. I've been asked this question so many times, especially from students and young people that we engage with, that if human rights are so central to this partnership, why doesn't anyone speak when our rights are actually at stake? And I really struggle to answer because there is no technical answer, there's just a political one. Because in paper, EU cares. They invest heavily in our systems. But in practice, the silence speaks louder. Yesterday at the opening session, Professor Jan Wouters described it perfectly. He mentioned ugly deals, situations where geopolitical interests are prioritized over the rights of people. And in that trade off, human rights become a bargaining chip rather than a guiding principle. My job involves facilitating dialogue, supporting governments become better at treaty reporting, helping institutions look aligned with human rights standards. And yet, when rights are violated in real time, the institutions with power choose silence. Then it becomes really hard to justify our work. It gets frustrating to a point when it feels like we are polishing the front of a building when the foundation is cracking. And I say this not just as a practitioner, but also as a human rights defender, someone who has felt the weight of this silence personally. I was also detained during a peaceful protest. I spent a night in jail. I was lucky enough that I got to spend only one night in jail, but it was enough for me to realize the distance between having rights and losing them is one decision made by someone with power. And in that moment, this theory of self determination became a lived experience. And that brings me to the question why I decide to stay at the system when I feel like it does not intend to protect the rights of its people. The answer is a bit difficult, but it's rather simple. Change from outside pressures the system, but change from the inside unlocks it. We need institutions that speak when it's risky, not only when it's safe. We need alliances that are human, not just product based. We need defenders, journalists, academics, practitioners standing together because repression isolates you. We need moral clarity. Silence is not neutrality, silence is a position. Working inside institutions also means facing the truth when they are only as bold as the people inside them. Policies don't show courage, it's the people who do. And that brings me to what I have learned that human rights are not protected by the existence of institutions, they are protected by the integrity of institutions. They're not advanced by producing reports, they are advanced when institutions refuse to remain silent. So, where do we go from here? So, for me, there are three things that are essential. First, we need honesty within the system. Human rights practitioners working inside the government or international organization must be able to say that this is not working because pretending is more damaging than admitting a challenge. Second, we need stronger networks of human rights defenders and practitioners, not project based networks, not photo or partnerships, real networks, human networks that show up for each other when the space shrinks. People who are not driven by any geopolitical agendas, who believe that every human being is entitled to the same human rights. And third, we need the courage to expect more from multilateral institutions. Silence cannot be the default setting of diplomacy. What gives me hope is that in Pakistan, the skepticism is not toward human rights, it's towards the institutions that defend them selectively. And maybe that's the point of this conference. Maybe multilateralism is not collapsing. Maybe people are finally refusing to accept performative multilateralism. And if multilateralism feels like it's collapsing, perhaps it's not a collapse, perhaps it's a reckoning. A demand that the system finally choose principle over comfort. And what gives me hope is that now there is less tolerance towards hypocrisy. People, especially young people in my country, are demanding clarity, not politeness or strategic silence. Human rights cannot survive on technical compliance. They survive on integrity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mahada. An important reminder to choose principle over comfort, which is something that I think is very easy to forget. And also, I think you drew a very well attention to the disparity between the urgency that's often felt by those whose rights are being violated versus the slow, plodding nature of a lot of multilateralism. So thank you very much for your contribution. Okay, so next we're going to hear from Andrea Domenico, who is currently the head of the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Ukraine. Before joining that office in December 2024, Andrea served as the head of office in OCHA in the occupied Palestinian territories, where during the last year he managed the humanitarian response to the ongoing war. Before that, he was head of office in OCHA in New York in the area of humanitarian financing, initially as head of unit and then serving as the chief of the country-based pooled fund section, contributing to the consolidation, and the growth of humanitarian funds. Between 2005 and 2011, he worked in OCHA DRC, initially on planning and then moving to humanitarian financing, managing one of the first common humanitarian funds funded by OCHA. So coming really from the front lines, both in terms of the conflicts that the world is facing and also the funding crisis that the international system is facing. So we look forward to your comments. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm the weak UN that Martina was talking about recently, and she's right. Um, it's it's the result of the systematic attack to the UN that has been. Now, I was saying it started with this year, but it is not true. It is not started this year. It has progressively been normalized throughout the years. And Trump is just yet another level and probably more blunt and shameless in the way it is done, but certainly not new. Um, Ukraine, and I'll focus in Ukraine because speaking about Palestine, I have someone much more eloquent and for sure more experienced than me talking about Palestine. But Ukraine started 4 years ago, didn't start this year. And the inability or the incapacity of the United Nations to have a serious dialogue around peace predates Trump. It is simply a space that has been progressively taken away from the responsibility of the United Nations. The dominant role of states has always been, sovereignty. Yesterday we were discussing a lot about, the dynamic between sovereignty and self-determination. And I was thinking, the fragmentation of the world has pushed those who still believe that power is the most important element in the relation, from individual to interstate relations, has pushed those member states to the point where undermining systematically the United Nations became the way to proceed. And in fact, if you look what has happened, I work in one of the three pillars that you were mentioning. I work on the humanitarian side. So what has happened throughout the history of the recent 10, 15 years, humanitarian part of the UN has been progressively supported generously and given space and possibly being quite successful. Okay, we're not perfect. But that is to the detriment of the other pillars, and in particular, the political and the peace pillar, where the space of the United Nations to be a meaningful actor in the relation has been progressively diluted and eroded. Accepted eventually in some countries because they are a little bit in the fringes of empires, let's say, less important, but absolutely not accepted as a role in critical situations. Look Palestine, look Ukraine. And so this erosion of the role of the UN has also brought an erosion of the rights that the UN represents, because after all, UN doesn't exist. After all, UN is just the will of 193 member states that decide what to do. Now, you have the officers like me, the people that work for the UN and believes on human rights and the role of the United Nations. And that is an apparatus that still, with all its inefficiencies, we can discuss how we can improve that. And some efforts are ongoing. But we don't decide what to do. We simply follow the instruction and we apply the law, right? So when we apply the law, we are either abandoned. Up to October 2023, I was in Palestine denouncing every day attacks in Hebron to Palestinians, killing of children, demolition, illegal demolition of houses, seizing of land of Palestinians. Nobody was paying attention to what I was saying. And actually in New York, they were saying, listen, pull it down, don't exaggerate, you know, because we don't have any means to push. And this erosion of rights has then have a substantive impact on the quality of life of people, because of course it generates pain, it generates suffering. The same suffering I've seen in Palestine, and increasingly after October 23 with the start of this horrendous phase that we still are in somehow, in my view, but also, and I've seen the same, of course, in Ukraine, because it took me a while to find it, but then when you go deeper into the front line, the biggest difference is that you have 365 kilometers of area that is bombarded, Gaza, and West Bank is a bit more scattered, the area of violations, but still, relatively is a place that you can drive in a few hours. You drive the entire country. Ukraine, it's 630,000 kilometers, so it's a bit bigger. And finding where the people and the suffering is, it takes some time. But when you go there, you see the same thing. The erosion of rights translating suffering for people like me and you, by the way, because Ukrainians 5 years ago thought that they were beyond any risk of being caught into fire or missiles attack. And then the other element is the narrative, because there is a constant, not only violation of rights, but also there is a constant attempt that we have seen a lot, I've seen a lot for sure, in Palestine, but also in Ukraine, where there is always the reversion. There is this tendency to put the onus of demonstrates that there has been a violation that is put back to you. I say, hold on, but you are the ones who's violating the rights. So why don't you prove that you didn't? No. You have to prove me that I did. And it happened no later than 2 weeks ago. I was in a mission outside along the front line, and our convoy came under attack. And the Russians immediately were saying, you know, how can you tell that is us? Instead of taking the responsibility seriously. Now, when it's Israel, okay, it's not okay, but it's a long story of tension and abuse of rights. When it is a permanent member of the United Nations that is doing this, a permanent member who's of the Security Council, who's supposed to be the leader in the international community of the rules that we have given to ourselves to protect people from unnecessary suffering, then it triggers a different dynamic in my mind. And I found that this attack against the legitimacy of the work we do, when led by and supported by important member states, Russians in Ukraine, Americans in Israel and Palestine, to be honest, it's really problematic, and is giving a sense that there is no more respect for the rules that our grandparents have agreed it was the only way to preserve humanity, because that is what the international order was supposed to be. You know, you mentioned the NGOs are not a threat. I disagree. I think that the UN and NGOs are becoming a threat, because the moment in which you remember authorities that even in war there are laws, and then there are rights that everybody should respect, then you become a threat. And now when you do humanitarian, you you try to stay away from the political dynamic. You say, okay, I'll let the colleagues of UNDP dealing with, or the PPA dealing with the politics. But then we all are driven by human rights because they are the foundation of the United Nations and what we do. And everything we do is framed around that. And then we are again caught in a moment of tensions, because if we remind member states that their role is first and foremost to protect their people, and even when they are in a fighting with another member states, they have to respect some rules of the other people, and then you're becoming a threat for them. So I have no idea what is the way forward, on the question that Pietro you sent. You say, okay, what is the strategy to go through this? I have no clue. I know that there is an impact on daily life of people. Today, and I've seen it over and over again. Schools are bombed, hospitals are bombed, civilians are killed. This is the new phase of war. There's no more, military targeting. Forget about it. The reality is that war today are fought against civilians, wherever they are. And so how can we protect this? Maybe one effort is really to make sure that, forget about the UN. I mean, I'm not convinced. Of course, I am convinced that the UN is the right thing, but I'm biased. But even forget about the UN. Let's assume that we don't need the UN. But what is important then is that there must be part of humanity that reaffirm the role of the rules that we have set for ourselves. Otherwise, it's the law of the jungle, the law of the strongest, and this is painful because it has shown, and it shows every day, that it brings a lot of pain to people, wherever they are. Are they in Palestine, in Ukraine, in Sudan, in DRC, in Somalia, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, wherever they are? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for this grim but honest picture of the current situation of the UN and about the responsibility of this situation. Now we move to our speaker, who is Issa Amro. Issa is a Palestinian human rights defender in Hebron, West Bank, Palestine. He co-founded a couple of organizations, Youth Against Settlement, and is the director of the Working for Peace and Justice Friends of Hebron. He has been recognized as a human rights defender by the EU. He received for his human rights defense action number of awards, including the Right Livelihood Award, the Franco-German Human Rights Prize, the Harvard Law School Human Rights Prize, and the One World Media Award. He was named Human Rights Defender of the Year by the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights at the UN, and his work has been featured in a number of international newspapers and magazines, including the New York Times Magazine, CNN, BBC, The New Yorker, and The Guardian. Amro is focused on community resilience and direct action in occupied Hebron and on international advocacy for Palestinian rights, and his action, his peaceful response to about community organizing has meant every type of affront by Israeli authorities, including detention and all the things that go with it. In 2025, he was also nominated Nobel Peace Prize, and Issa has been listed in Time Magazine 100 Next Leaders. So you already are a leader, of course. So Issa, you have the floor. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much. And I'm very proud to know you and your great work and contribution for Palestine. It's my honor to be with old friends who are working for justice, peace, and human rights, and they don't stop. And I'm very happy to hear your voice from Pakistan. First, I want to say buongiorno for the students who are up, and they are really concentrating with us here. and all other students. I usually love to go to talk to university students. And I want to thank Padova University, because the university and the Human Rights Center here, they are leading the great work for human rights and for allowing many Palestinian voices here. I'm very proud of Padova University and the students and the team, the administration, and their contribution to the Peace March. So Padova is one of the best universities for me. And to be very honest, I'm coming from Hebron, from the West Bank, Al Khalil. And in the last two years, it was not easy life for us. But whenever I'm invited to any university, I just say, yes, I have to go. Because I started my activism from my university time. I was a student who cared only about his degree. And when the occupation closed my university, for me, it was about my education. It was not about occupation. Because my family, and especially for all the students here, their families want them to be, to be better than them, okay? And that's my family. And in Palestine, we invest a lot in education because it's one of the tactics and one of the ways to fight the occupation. I don't know if I'm lucky that the occupation closed my university in my last year, and I had to fight the closure of my university to get my engineering degree. I fought the occupation. I managed with other students. This is something very important, that it's not only education. This is my lesson from my education time. It's not about occupation. It's not about education. It's about a passion too. You have to have a passion as a student. And I know that from studying the students' movements in history, the students are the change makers. The students are the leaders of tomorrow. And in the last 2 years, we saw how many universities and how many students in the world, they made a huge change pro-Palestine. The encampment in the United States universities, in Columbia, in MIT, in Harvard, here in Italy, in London, in Europe, the student movement pressured the ICC to issue an arrest warrant for the current Prime Minister of Israel. It's a very, very big achievement, by the way. Israel is accused of genocide. That's what you do here to pressure the mechanism. Andrea said that the UN, I don't know, I want to be more clear about the UN. The UN is not enough. The UN is very important, but it's not enough. We need all to work hard as civil society, as students, as activists to make a change in Pakistan, in Ukraine. I have a brother living in Kharkiv. So it's similar, oppressors. The Russians invading Ukraine is not less than the Israelis invading Gaza and the West Bank and the war of genocide. The situation in the ground is really crazy. I want to describe a little bit of what's going on in the West Bank, and you all follow what's going on in Gaza. But before that, I want to thank you all for being in the right side of history. This is something very important. I'm very proud, even as Issa, that I'm in the right side of history. Because it's not easy to be in the right side of history. Usually people are either offenders or defenders, or people who don't care. And the majority, unfortunately, they are in their comfort zones. They don't care. To be a defender on the right time, on the right place, you will be very proud in the future because you chose to be peacemakers. We are the peacemakers. No one here encourage any kind of racism, and among it, anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. For us, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and any kind of racism is not part of our struggle. It is something very important. So we don't have any anti-Semite leader here. In the contrary, who's generating anti-Semitism is the occupation and the war makers, not us. So thank you very much for what are you doing. I know that many of you say we don't do enough. Our work is not efficient. Whatever we do is useless. No, I tell you from the field, from Hebron, we see you here in Italy, what you do. We see anybody doing anything for Palestine, and it's not only me, by the way. All the women and the children and the Palestinians, they see all the solidarity with them. And you give energy. You give us power and hope that we are not alone. And we are not dying in silence. This is something very important. So your work, your tweet, your conferences, your protest, your contribution is part of our struggle. Because our struggle is about the land and the narrative. We are the land protector. We protect the land and we stay and we remain. And you are the narrative. You are our narrative. Without you, we would not have a voice. We don't exist for anybody. So we will be an easy target for the oppressors, for the occupiers to get rid of us. So your work in the narrative, you are doing amazing. About the land, yes, the land is suffering. You know, we lose a lot of land, and we lost many people, around 70,000 Palestinian. The majority of them are civilians, women and children in Gaza and in the West Bank. More than that, we lived in a very hard life. And to be very honest, I don't know how we managed to stay strong. It's as a dream, you know, as a nightmare. How come we are able to live in the West Bank with almost 1,000 checkpoints? That was how was Hebron. In my city, Hebron is the microcosm of the Israeli occupation. Physical obstacles, 22 checkpoints in less than 1 kilometer square, closed shops, closed markets, closed houses, segregated streets, settler violence, army aggression. It was in a small area. Then that microcosm, that sample, moved after October 7th to all over West Bank. Closure, restrictions, settlers and army aggression, militia from the Israeli military and Israeli settlers attacking Palestinians. And the Israeli government is locating more and more money for infrastructure of Israeli settlements, and even they support the Israeli violent terrorist settlers. So in 2024, Israeli government located more than 7 billion shekels for settlements in the West. During the war, to tell you what exactly happening, that they are busy with Gaza and they are really trying to do annexation in the West Bank. More than 1,400 settler attacks in West without accountability, with full impunity. Usually per year, they establish 7 to 10 outposts, illegal settlement, even according to the Israeli law. 2024, around 70 outposts. Look to this. Israel confiscated more than, they declared it as a state land, 24,000 dunams. That's half of what they confiscated in the last 30 years. This is something very important. They decided to build in E1 area. E1 is next to Jerusalem. It means they stole 12,000 dunams of Palestinian land. It means that they sieged Jerusalem, and there is no, open, entrance to Jerusalem from the Palestinian state. That means Palestinian state is not viable anymore. So when Italy talks about two-state solution, when the EU talks about the two-state solution, now there is no two-state solution on the ground. There is no geographical continuity between the north and the south. And not only that, it's not the end. It's the beginning of their end goal is that Palestinians don't exist in West Bank or Gaza. Their middle term goal is that Palestinians will live in ghettos. They reduced the quantity of water to Hebron by 40%. So we are dying for water. They reduced the quantity of electricity for Hebron. I'm talking about Hebron, but it means that it's all over West Bank. Why? Because Israel is controlling our water, controlling our electricity, import and export. We eat what they allow us to eat, because import and export, it's in the hands of the Israeli government. And after October 7th, they are making it harder and harder. But in Europe, we are neutral. Why we act? Are you neutral? No. Is the problem is in the US? No. You know why? They say, whenever I talk to European officials, they tell me, but the United States. 72 billion investment of Europe in Israel. 72 billion euros investment of European countries in Israel. A lot of this money is given to research about tech, high tech. I'm starting researching high tech. And Hebron is described as, we call it tech lab. We are in a tech lab. You know what it means, a tech lab? It means the Israeli companies, they come to Hebron, they test their technology of their surveillance with, we call it facial recognition, eyes recognition, voice recognition, I don't know, maybe body recognition, maybe DNA recognition, you don't know, because we are in a lab. You don't know what they test on you as a Palestinian, because wherever you go, you see CCTV cameras, or you see smart devices in the city. You don't know why that device is there. Even you see smart shooters, automated gun in an inhabited checkpoint, which means why there is a need to automated weapon in a checkpoint where soldiers are there. So when I asked, I found out that it's a private company from Tel Aviv testing that new smart shooter in Hebron, in inhabited area, from the main checkpoint in Hebron, kids, women, children. And with their AI surveillance, they profile us. So they have red wolf, blue wolf technologies. So Israel is misusing the AI, and that's a lot of that research. It's part of the 72 billion euros investment of Europe in Israel. Something very important. So you are, as many countries here in Europe, you are part of the problem. You are not part of the solution. So this is why we come to Europeans and talk to them and tell them, please, act to stop your states from selling weapons to Israel, from investing their research in Israel, because Israel is accused of genocide. It's a stigma. It will not change. For many, many years, it will not change. And in the United States is investing only $39 billion. So Europe is double investment in Israel, the same with the trade between Israel and the European Union. And we can't do, we don't know. No, you can, and we need your voice, and we want you to do more and more, especially with this AI, scary systems. When I was a student, I'm automotive engineer, we were trying to enhance the machines to become smarter, to increase the efficiency of that machines, to be very honest, I'm afraid of this, machine. The machine was controlled by us. Now the machine is going to, lead us. And in Gaza, they use the drones to kill children, I'm teaching. I have many cases of children were shot on the neck. That's the drone target. They shot on the neck of children, of paramedics, of journalists in Gaza with 10% error rate. And in the West Bank, with my son, when I walk to the checkpoint, the cameras there at the checkpoint misidentify my son, and it treats him as an adult. So he can't go to the checkpoint without me. Otherwise, he will be detained because he's not the same person. And the soldiers don't care. They depend on that machine, and that machine is with a cold blood. It doesn't care. That's it. This is what we have, and that's the final decision. So the AI in Hebron, it was taken after October 7th to many other cities in the West Bank. And what I was amazed that when I went to Columbia University before I come here, I found a checkpoint at the campus working with AI. So these technologies, if we don't stop them in Hebron and West Bank in Gaza, maybe in the future, it will come here to Italy, to your campuses, to your markets, and profiling you. This is something very important. It profiles you, and it spies at you. It's not only profiling you. You know what hurts me most? Not to feel that I am watched all the time. I'm watched, not only me. All Palestinians are watched. All our telecommunication, they store it in online. All our phone calls or our internet, social media, it's stored, and they analyze it with certain applications. What hurts me most, that I feel that I am a simulation object. You know what is simulation object? That I am an object. They test their technology on me, then they sell it to Pakistan, to Kashmir, to India, anywhere. Their market has no limits. And unfortunately, the world is shaking, because in the last 2 years, the people started questioning human rights law, the international law, and the peacemaking mechanism. Because many countries, they said, we will not arrest Netanyahu, but they are ready to arrest Putin. It's good, arrest Putin and arrest Netanyahu. So many countries discredited the international law to please the Israeli government. And a lot of free speech was violated in Germany. Many Germans told me, Issa, we feel that we don't have free speech in Germany. But many people here in Italy, they felt that they don't have free speech. Why? Because of the occupation. So the occupation is an interest of all of us who believe in human rights and international law to end it, to make the occupiers and the oppressor accountable. Can we do that? Yes, we can do that, but we have to be creative. We have to be smart in how we make it costly, and without concrete actions to make the occupation costly for the occupier, nothing will change. It's not a conflict, it's something very, very important. It's a relation between an oppressor and oppressed people, occupation, occupiers, and occupied people. And at all, don't be afraid to increase awareness about this and to speak loud, especially as students. You are here, it means that you are in the right side of history, and students and universities are the main key for the change. Something very, very important. And I hope that Padova will be one of the leaders of all Italian universities to have a global student movement against racism, against apartheid, against inequality, and for justice and peace for everybody in the Middle East and even all over the world. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Issa, for your comments and your remarks. I'm always struck when I hear a Palestinian speak about the experience of the Palestinian people, but also their own lived experience. Just the strength it takes to be always representing what's happening and the voice of what's happening in a occupation, in a conflict that didn't start 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 4 years ago, but decades ago. And as you were speaking, I was reminded of the first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And the history of the Palestinian people is really a constant reminder that we have a lot of work to do in order to make sure that that value that was enshrined in the Universal Declaration is actually a lived value and not just an aspirational one. So thank you. Okay, I was also very glad to hear you point to the students that are in the room and the role of universities as change makers, because our last speaker is indeed representing a student voice. So we have Fernanda Jimenez, a student of the master's degree in human rights and multi-level governance here at the University of Padova. She comes to us as a researcher and journalist from Costa Rica. She holds a bachelor's degree in collective communication sciences, as well as strategic communication. And her work explores the intersection of politics, populism, gender, digital media, and climate change in Latin America. And I believe you've been researching with your fellow students the perspective of students and I guess young people on the challenges of multilateralism, or indeed the collapse of multilateralism. So Fernanda, over to you.
Thank you, Orla. Thank you, Professor De Perini, and thank you for the university for inviting me. I also want to thank my fellow panelists, especially Issa. It is very hard to follow your important words, but I will give it a go. So I was invited here today to give the students' perspective on the collapsing multilateral order. A very intimidating prospect, especially given that I feel I am here in representation of my fellow students, and I would never presume that my opinions are universally or even largely shared by the student body. So I dusted off my journalistic chops and went to interview my classmates. So today I hope to share with you their opinions as well as my own, and share how I make sense of what I see happening with the multilateral order, and how I stay somewhat optimistic in the process. So my first question to them was, is multilateralism in crisis? Because I thought that the premise of this event deserved some questioning as well. So some of my classmates said that historically they have seen multilateralism work when it serves a capitalist or an economic interest, and not really when it's in regard of the international protection of human rights. One of them also pointed one of the greatest discrepancies of multilateralism. For example, in many cases, there have been no official Palestinian delegations in international summits that were meant to discuss their rights or their situation. One of the most insightful answers came from one of the representatives of the Latin American collective, who mentioned that in her view, multilateralism can be understood as a continuation of the colonialist practices. Of course, power right now doesn't manifest in such a direct way, but through economic and military accords, we have an indirect colonialism. She said sovereignty is a standard that it's not always met, and one country can significantly tip the balance in the global stage. She specifically said, and I quote, "Justice of the international community stops at the borders of the geopolitical interest of these global superpowers." As a Latin American myself, also trained in the decolonialist perspective, my opinion lies very closely to hers. To me, calling it a crisis is also a bit confusing. I don't want to be overly droll by saying that it sounded to me like make multilateralism great again. And I was left wondering, like, well, when was it great to begin with? Of course, pretending that nothing has changed and that nothing is different right now would be overly simplistic. Some of my classmates would also point out that there were better times, like when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was first introduced. We are all skeptical that we would get a document such as this one in the current political climate. But I remain a bit cynical. Yes, they signed it, but I also failed to think of a time when these global superpowers were not violating them as well. I agree that at some point the discourse was better and political will seemed to be there. But in practice, their actions didn't necessarily align. For example, I also work in climate change, and I remember, well, the Paris Accord is often cited as one of the successes of multilateralism. And I remember back in the day feeling encouraged and hopeful when it was signed. But a decade later, we see that there are almost no countries that stick to their own NDCs, their nationally determined commitments. What I find interesting and what contributes to the arguments that I am about to make is that we see two different discourses over the same actions. So, for example, we see states that are still discursively concerned with the climate crisis, and others that are openly boycotting COP and calling climate change a green scam. Neither of these parties is living up to the commitments they themselves have imposed on their own countries. So what I would argue right now is that we live in an era where the masks are falling off. In the past, it was easier for one country to promote a treaty and break it, but also control the narrative enough to still look like a promoter of human rights. It was easier to hide. However, now, thanks to new communication technologies, every person has become a sort of accountability mechanism of their own. Almost everyone can broadcast the violations and the violence they are being subjected to. So, for example, the US has a long history of intervention and violence in Latin America. But did you know that the US was also funding a genocide in my region not 40 years ago? I am talking about the Maya Itzil genocide in Guatemala in like 80s, 90s. So I wonder how many people outside Guatemala were aware of the situation at the time. I sincerely doubt that even the people in the US whose tax dollars were funding this knew that this was happening. Now, however, genocide doesn't seem like something you can hide. Every time we check our phones, we hear the voices and see the faces of the people who are living through one of the worst humanitarian crises the world has ever seen. So now the masks are falling off. I am theorizing here, but when hypocrisy becomes so evident, you have two options. You either start acting in accordance with the standards you profess to uphold, or you shift your discourse to legitimize the foreign policy you've consistently pursued. I think we're seeing this rise in authoritarian and nationalist discourse in part because there is a need to justify and normalize the violence that we're seeing. But this more violent speech is also a feedback loop that increases the violations, and it's also a slippery slope that has been corroding some of the principles of international order. So it is easy to look at the world right now, at the violence and the impunity, and wonder why people would study what we study. Why bother when the international organizations and institutions that we study in class seem to be such poor guardians of what they claim to protect? Why study this if multilateralism at the end of the day is just a continuation of the colonialist power dressed in proper words and diplomacy? Well, the good news is that even if students showcase this sobering and realist perspective of multilateralism, if you probe them enough, they are still positive and idealists at heart. For example, someone told me, of course it doesn't work. It historically hasn't, but it's a nice dream, isn't it? And then the representative of the Latin American collective also told me, like, yes, it doesn't work, but if we're not fighting for it, what are we even doing? And I think that this crisis, as we call it, this moment where the masks and the blindfolds are falling off, also gives us a unique opportunity. Earlier, I argued that having so much evidence of the violent also begets a national rhetoric that justifies it and in turn makes it even worse. I stand by that. However, I also think that now we have a clearer picture of what we're fighting against. It is hard to reckon with all this violence when we thought the world was moving towards something better. But now we're simply seeing things as they truly are. And being fully aware of them, we can move to something that it's actually better. Another student told me that maybe this generation, now that we have more consciousness and we see things as what they are, we have access to all this information, maybe then it's our generation who can actually make a difference. So in short, human rights students have always been aware of the challenges of multilateralism, but they don't think it's anything new. And we are here anyway. I think we're a bunch of people that didn't assume things were working properly. That's why we're here. So that's why we're attracted to the degree in the first place. But in this moment, when we know how terrible things actually are, I would argue we're in a better position to actually act. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fernanda, for this brilliant contribution and for the idea of engaging your classmates in order to have a collective contribution from our class of human rights and multi-level governance. So thank you all the speakers for having provided such a snapshot, which were, I think, very effective on the perspective we are discussing. And now the plan would be to have a couple of questions from us, and then to move for the Q&A with the audience. So if you already want to think some question, you are already encouraged to do so. So my question would be, it's something that emerged from some of your, from some of your contribution, and is the matter of alliances. It seems that despite the very difficult situation we are facing, there is some sort of challenge in creating and thinking, imagining new type of alliances that can help moving these political demands forward about human rights. So I would like to, if you can, consider, have a short reflection about how can we build alliances among different sectors, different actors in this maybe not period of crisis, but of course different international context in which human rights are being pushed forward. I think we can follow the same line of intervention. Then maybe the next question we go backwards. Thank you, Martina.
Yeah, I hope maybe we can also take some questions from the audience later. And at this particular point in time, what we are trying to do is to use our experience, our practical experience from the locations where we work to do advocacy, okay, on human rights. So we are finding it also to develop on the responses of the students. It was very, very interesting to have the students' perspective on this table. We see that the evidence that we see every morning when we woke up on Instagram and on the social media needs to be systematized, translated into real experience, and then brought to the table of decision makers, of media agencies to build advocacy strategies. So we think that is a way forward to build on defending the concept of human rights, and most of all defending the possibility and the need to work on conflict prevention and non-violent conflict transformation by peace-building action, civilian peacekeeping, unarmed peacekeeping. And this is something that is being done, but it is not visible. So basically, for example, what we have seen in Iraq, when the so-called Islamic State, but it doesn't have anything to do with Islam, when Daesh was conquering 1/3 of Iraq, at that time something somehow positive happened. That itself is a result of the failure to deal with the armed conflicts and the ethnic and sectarian fractures in the region in the previous 20 years. Anyway, we were there, and besides the military offensive against Daesh, the states, the anti-Daesh coalition, decided to spend money and invest on peace building, on mending the wounds between communities and sects, and working on major reconciliation and dialogue programs. That allowed the UN system, UNDP, civil society to involve millions of Iraqis into reconciliation programs to read and be conscious, you know, about the human rights violations that led to this disaster, that led many Iraqi people to think that maybe Daesh would better protect them with respect to the government in Baghdad, led military actors to withdraw rather than resist the invasion of Daesh. And through this common analysis, many people in Iraq regained the capacity to rebuild the social structure, trust living together again, coming back to the territories from which they had been displaced, reaffirm which were the basic human rights that for whom they should stand together. Yazidi, Sunni, and Turkmen, and all the different minorities together with the majorities. That space to have a discussion about the human rights that had been violated and how to regain common human rights by peaceful means has been fundamental in overcoming the disaster of the occupation of Iraq by Daesh. So at that time, yes, there may have been mistakes done, bringing models from outside with some kind of colonial perspective, but it was mainly the people of Iraq. So peace building, civilian peace building works only if it is done by people that are affected by conflict. Internationals or outsiders may come to give a form of inspiration, to promote creativity, regarding things that can be done. But what works is only locally led peace building action. I remember the first time I met Issa 20 years ago. The Palestinian non-violent movement for the so-called popular struggle was coming to Amman to discuss with Iraqi activists and show them that there was a possibility to exert a power as civil society in a country where it looked impossible for civil society to exercise power because everything was in the hand of militia and armed wings of political parties. And then it was the Palestinian inspiring the Iraqis to believe that a concept of peace founded on human rights was possible fighting for by civil society actors, together with local authorities, together with UN agencies. So at that time, sharing good practices, what worked, what didn't work, sharing the vulnerabilities of peace workers and human rights defenders helped Iraqis to found a global, a national non-violent movement that did change a lot the power imbalance in several governorates of Iraq. So we have to explain these examples. We have to make it visible how people continue doing this along decades, and to prove that investing in peaceful means to defend people's rights, to promote well-being, to defend human rights defenders, to promote security of the people work. they have, well, violence doesn't work. I mean, we've seen it, you know, Afghanistan, we got out of Afghanistan and violence didn't work. And then we got into Ukraine. It should have been like a super quick war, and violence doesn't work. That's evident, you know, but does peace work? We have to prove that peace work, and that defending human rights manages to de-escalate armed action, armed responses. And yes, that can be a threat for authoritarian governments, but it can also have a transformative power for each of them, because in every authoritarian government, there are some diplomats, some political forces, some politicians that may want to try alternatives, you know, to keep being in power, to keep feeling that they are, you know, that they are increasing the consensus towards them by their people. Because even in the worst situations, there are people that want to rule not just with fear, but with consensus. And what we can do as human rights actors, what we can do with the multilateral system is to strengthen these parts of each government, of each authority that want to govern by consensus. And we have to shape a new global consensus on human rights that is not colonial, that doesn't have double standards. It is needed, it is possible, and again, I do think that the alliance with universities is very important to this end. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. For the alliances to be effective, I think they have to be diverse. I mean, from different actors, for instance, civil society, academia, and human rights defender practitioners. They have to come together and bring different perspectives. And it's also very important that, you know, if we are aware that we do not give one sector the monopoly over the narrative. For instance, the civil society, they bring connections from the communities. The defenders, they bring the real life experiences. And the academia, they bring the evidence, the research. So it's very important that these actors, because I have seen firsthand, when you give too much power, too much monopoly to one actor, and when the time comes and they fail to stand up, so it setbacks the whole movement or the whole environment. So it's very important that these stakeholders have equal voice, and they bring together, and these alliances are not just also they have equality over the experience of the narrative, but also it's regular also. I mean, we're sharing experiences, we are coming together on a regular basis, so we stand up for each other when the time comes. Thanks.
So I was thinking, what are we doing already? There is something that is very a la mode now, which is in our sector, which is localization, right? We speak a lot about localization. So localization means basically working with civil society in the place where you are operating. As you can imagine, focusing on Ukraine, on the one hand, by far, they are the most brave and omnipresent operators that we have in Ukraine. You know, there has been progressively this devolution and transfer of risk, and so they are the ones who are delivering real life-saving assistance across the front line. But also they are, in some occasions, not all of them, but there is a good part of those organizations that are deeply emotionally involved in the war, right? Because they have their brothers, their sisters, their parents fighting, and so they don't distinguish anymore the principle of the humanitarian principle of neutrality and partiality. And it's a very complicated discussion to have, because how would you not support their effort to be partisan in their delivery of assistance, given that they are, helping literally their brothers in fighting. But that brings back to, for me at least, a couple of thoughts. First of all, while giving the space to local civil society, I think we have to maintain the connection with the rest of the world, because otherwise we dilute and delete actually international solidarity. You are called un ponte per. It's this ambition of human beings to be connected all together across the globe around common foundations. And I truly believe on this. And this is an important element of the international cooperation that we have to preserve. Second, I think we have to preserve roles and responsibilities. And again, I'm not defending the UN per se, but I found that, you need to differentiate different roles within the civil society, the international society, international community of society that we have created. The nature of the organization I'm working with is not the same that of yours. You are a group of private individuals that believes on a common objective and work to that. I am the result of a conversion of an agreement of member states that have another. And so I think it is important, and there has been in the recent years a little bit this tendency to confuse everything around in the name of inclusivity and participation, then equalizing a little bit everybody. And it's not, better or worse. It's about simply different roles in the society that we're living through. So for me, that's an important element. And that brings also back in my mind, I think we have to be very careful not to confuse maybe, yes, part of the efforts that human rights have been doing were colonial in its inspirations. But yesterday, I think in the opening remarks, someone was insisting of the importance of universality of rights. And I'm a true believer of that. I do believe, and based also in the experience, I've worked in 5 continents in my life, and I've seen that, yes, there are social, religion, cultural differences, of course, but ultimately, there is a common thread that links human beings, and that is where universality should be hooked. And last but not least, I think that what will help is to reacquire the space for humanitarian diplomacy. It's an element of the work that, for sure, the United Nations, but also other entities in the private sector should maintain and continue engaging, because unless you keep open the door of the dialogue, there is no way out. I mean, it comes to mind, I Shake the Devil's Hands, the Dallaire book that he wrote. And I was reading it a few years back when I was in Congo and was in the middle of some problems. And it resonates then since then forever with me. If you want to try to tackle some of these fundamental challenges against behaviors that violated the deepest dignity of human beings, you have to be able to speak to the devil or the enemy or the opposition, whatever you want to call it, or all the above, actually. And that's fundamental. It's fundamental. Keeping the dialogue with the other is the only way out to promote rights of individuals, in my experience. Thank you.
it's very difficult to add after Martina and Andrea contribution. I second what they said, and I want to be short in my answer because we want to leave some questions for you as audience. You know, the Palestinian movement suffered a lot from the division from within the movement. And the division between Gaza and the West Bank was used by the Israeli government to, you know, even try to, you know, support that division, that because divide and conquer is a colonial policy. I believe a lot in that diversity is a strength. It's not a weakness. I love to work in a diverse movement, and we should all work to go over our differences and go toward the main goal to make the change. And our unity must be around the international law as Palestinians and around actions and concrete actions. What made the hundreds of thousands of Italians to go down to the streets was a great action with a flotilla. So if you do something, you know, with a meaning and with a specific goal, you can have more people, and you have a real movement around that. In Palestine, we started, you know, our work in the Arab nonviolence movement in Amman to make a movement in the Arab countries. And we kept trying within Palestine even. And after October 7th, to be very honest, what kept us in our land, in Hebron, for example, and other cities, our unity as communities. First, we unified the communities together. We went over our differences, our, you know, division, and we worked as a community together. And with other communities, we started coordinating with other communities to help each other and to share information and to share resources. It's very, very important to feel that alone you can't win. It's something very, very important that we can win together. And try all the time to, you know, to listen to all the voices. Here in Europe, the pro-Palestine movement, there is a kind of sometimes competition, sometimes different political stands. So my call to everybody, unity is a strength, diversity is a strength. When we are united, we are much, much more stronger. And there is no way to have a consensus about a specific idea. There is no way. With your children, you disagree. With your wife, with your family, with your friends. So this is something very important, that we focus on a goal. We focus on the main enemy of everybody. So I tell everybody in the world and in Palestine too, don't be divided between one-state solution or two-state solution, because we are not there. We all agree as Palestinians and pro-Palestinian groups that our main enemy is the occupation and the apartheid and the inequality. Let's start making a movement to make occupation and apartheid costly, which will lead us to have solutions, because we are not there yet. Some people think about the solutions before they do anything to make solutions possible. So this is my message to everybody. Don't be distracted or divided about what is the solution. Let's be united about the methods. Let's be united about the tactics and the strategies which lead us to the solution. And after we are there, almost there for the solution, I think we will not disagree, because something very, very important, a lot of variables change by time. And the movement, especially the student movement, should think as students how to work together everywhere in Europe. And usually I ask the student movement to be engaged with the students in Palestine, in Palestinian universities. So we can, together with students, make a student movement with professors and lecturers. They can be connected with the university. So artists, they can work with artists. Engineers, they can work with engineers. So fighting occupation and apartheid will be part of our life routine in our professions. This is how we can make a bigger movement. To be very honest, the pro-Palestine movement and the solidarity campaigns, we saw the unity in many, many countries, and that made us really win the narrative. We are winning. I hope that people don't come back to their comfort zone, because a ceasefire is in Gaza, but every day the Israeli occupation kills Palestinians in the ground, and the war is not finished, and the occupation is there, apartheid is there, inequality and Israeli Jewish supremacy is there. So we can work we can continue to work to make the change for everybody. This is how I see how we can be unified, but we should act from a goodwill and from you know, the diversity is a strength and it's not a weakness.
Hi. So I wanted to address something Andrea brought up about colonialism and like this universality of human rights. And I want to clarify a point that when I called it colonialist, I didn't mean to put into question the universality of human rights, rather how the system works. Because when you come from a third world country, or that is your reality, sometimes you don't feel sovereignty, but in the sense that you can receive a letter from the US and suddenly you have to change your vote in the UN. Because if they are angry at you or decide to impose any sort of measures, your economy might collapse. So that's where I was coming from, not questioning the universality of the rights, which I do believe in as well. But to address the question of how to build better alliances, I do want to keep it short. But I think it's also tons of translation work. I think from the academia, we're sometimes boring. Or we do these investigations and this work and we keep to ourselves, and like there is no outreach or no effort to go out and do something with the information that we are producing. Also from the journalists, I think there needs to be a shift or a change. Many people feel scared of approaching a journalist to have their words twisted. And well, I do defend journalism most of the time. I see that there has been like an unfair and biased coverage of what is happening, and we see it in the language of children instead of minors instead of children, or like hostages instead of prisoners, like how one words are used for one side and other words are used for the other. So I think we need to change the way we communicate with each other. Like academia has to do more outreach so that the information that we produce is useful. And journalism has to check their standards and their language so that we don't use specific words for one side and like sanitized words for the other. But I'll keep it here.
Thank you very much. So we have 15 minutes left. So we're going to go to the floor now. Yes, okay. So, okay, what I would suggest is I'm going to, especially to the academics in the room, really ask that you are very focused in your question rather than giving us the benefit of your deep knowledge. We would rather a question for the panelists. If you can also identify whether your question is for a specific panelist or for the panelist in general. So I'm going to take 4 questions because really we only have about 10 minutes. So I saw Roberto, there's someone behind you there. I see a lady in a red scarf.
Thank you. I have a question for Issa. There is an indicator widely recognized among experts that measure whether an army attacked indiscriminately a population. It is called civilians to combatants rate. In Ukraine, it's about 10%, meaning that 4% of deaths are civilians and about 96% are combatants. In Gaza, is 83%, meaning that 83% of death are civilians and 17% are so-called combatants. So this distinguishes a war from a genocide, but it also shows the double standard of the West, given the aid and military support provided to one country and not to the other. It also shows that some victims are worthier than others. Why do you think Western politicians, journalists, and intellectuals, including academics that have been silent on Gaza, why do you think they have denied, minimized the genocide in Gaza? Is it about politics, geopolitical interest, or it's about psychology? Exclusive indignation, or selective compassion? Thank you.
Good morning. First, I would like to thank all the speakers for their speeches. My question as well is referred to Mr. Issa Amro. I really appreciated your contribution in saying...
Can you introduce yourself first?
I'm Lorenzo, a human rights and multi-level governance student. I really appreciated your contribution in saying that institutions are not enough for reaching social justice and human rights protection. Student movements in the last 2 years have been very active here in Italy and in Padova as well to fight against the genocide in Palestine and to ask concrete actions to both the government and the university. This is because Italy is the third exporter in the world of weapons to Israel. It has continued to provide logistical support, weapons, and dual-use materials to the Zionist entity, even despite the ongoing genocide. The University of Padova, as well, has collaborated in the development of the war economy and that killed thousands and thousands of Palestinians. Despite presenting itself to the public and as an institution devoted to the cause, to the human rights cause, and some professors and like the Human Rights Center actually are devoted to that cause, don't get me wrong. Our university continues to maintain agreements with dozens of Israeli companies and universities directly involved in the genocide, in which the technology used against the Palestinian population is developed. Some of those universities are very close to Gaza, and one of them, the Sapir Academic College, has become a logistic base for the IDF in the last 2 years. The University of Padova continues to maintain agreements with Leonardo SPA, a company with a 30% government co-ownership. Leonardo has made billions and billions of dollars in the last 2 years by selling weapons to Israel. Leonardo exploits the know-how of university students and researchers to increase their profits and develop technologies meant to be placed on the world market. UNDP has also agreements with Eni, the major Italian fossil fuel company. On October 29, 2023, the Israeli energy minister announced the signing of an agreement by which Eni and other Israeli companies obtained a license to exploit the offshore gas field in front of Gaza. The University of Padova continues to profit from the war economy and the genocide of the Palestinian people. We, as students, thanks to the crucial support of a group of researchers and PhD students through written motions, demonstrations, and building occupations, we asked hundreds of times to the university to suspend and delete all the agreements with the war companies and with the Zionist entity in general. The university response has always been silence when it was good, or the deployment of police to repress us and prevent us from interacting with the governance of the university. Sorry for the long introduction, but I believe it was necessary to present the contradiction in which we students live every day with this university that tries to teach the value of protection of human rights, but at the same time gets its hands dirty with blood to increase its economic profit. What I want to say is that it's absolutely true that the institutions are not enough, but also the university is complicit in the violation of human rights and the repression of civil society. How can we students continue our struggle against the war economy and the repression of and against the genocide, to obtain an academic boycott, the elimination of any agreements with the terrorist state of Israel, and the major accountability on the part of both the university and the institutions? And just to conclude, that on the basis of your experience, what can we do to make the university a truly critical, free space, a space that can truly give space for civil society and for the human rights advocacy? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentations. My name is Adina Deaku, and I'm an environmental psychology researcher and consultant. The question goes to everyone in the panel who would like to comment on it. There were mentions earlier about the value that grassroots organizations are bringing, NGOs, and the valuable work that they're doing. Unfortunately, they are funded through profits, philanthropy, that are coming very often from extractive businesses that are creating the problems that NGOs are trying to advocate to solving in the first place. So from this lens, aren't NGOs actually perpetuating the problem? And it's an open invitation to answer. Are we doing or any service to ourselves, pointing the finger at the US that they're cutting funds for aid when they are doing war economy? Their GDP is partly relying on the war economy. They're lobbying Europe to invest more money, to retract the money from education, health, and invest more in weapons in the name of security. When their education system is far from democratic because it's very expensive and students have student loans even before being employed, and when their health system, it's not a universal right. So are they an example of democracy that we want to bring in the world? So the question is, are we actually doing any favors to ourselves with the questions or the way we are phrasing the issues, or should we radically change how we view the world? For example, wouldn't we do ourselves a favor to redefine business from a for-profit entity to an entity that solves social issues and creates social value in a financially sustainable way, so that everybody, regardless of their skin color, geographical location, anything that you want to add as a labeler there, can really have enough? So thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. I am Mahmoud, Associate Professor of Economics from Al-Azhar University, Gaza, visiting professor here in Padova now. 40 days I was in Gaza. I spent all the time during the war there. It was really very difficult. I was injured many times. I survived by a miracle. My wife was injured also. 2 of my brothers were dead, martyred, my nephew also. We weren't able to eat for months. All of that's very difficult, but I want to tell you a thing very, very important, that one of the hardest things on the people of Gaza even those children are running in the street there is a part there want to decide who rule and govern the Palestinians there. The Palestinians can't accept anyone to decide who rule them, who govern them, because this is the main part, core area, the main pillar of the self-determination right, which could lead to justice and peace later. And if we call this ceasefire now in Gaza as a peace process or a peace accord, as called by Trump, it couldn't be when they want to decide who rule us. So I would hope that the conference title was from the right of liberty to the right of self-determination, not to the peace, because when we mention peace now, at these circumstances, under the existence of occupation and all of brutal behavior of the Israeli occupation, it can put both victims and oppressors under the same moral umbrella. So I think the most important thing to understand, it isn't just a humanitarian, it's a conflict of volunty between us, between this occupation. The second thing, when it was the strike here in Italy, I was shared it on the internet, on the Facebook, meanwhile I was in Gaza. And all of the people there was honored, very proud of you, of your participation. They always compare it to the other participation of other nations, especially the Arab and the Islamic nations. That's very good, but we have to understand that when you defend Gaza, you defend yourself. The extremism in Israel intend to fuel the Middle East, because the fueling Middle East will fuel the conflict between Islam and the West, between the South and North. And this will feed also the extremism in Europe. Extremism feeds itself. I mean that when you defend Gaza, you defend yourself. You defend the your right of speech. On the other hand, unfortunately, we found a volunty of the Italian people and European people, but the governments are completely separated or isolated, because we continue making participation and agreements with the Israeli, no matter what the field of participation, because in economics, there's an effect, we call it fungibility effect. This fungibility effect, if you supported the Israeli, for example, in the field of health, they can move the finance or fund that already determined for health to the military part. So the boycotting Israel should be in all parts as it was before, to oblige them to follow the regulations, the international volunty, the international law, and to oblige them to respect the human rights. And we can say what happened today in the Security Committee in the Knesset. They agreed to enact a law in the Knesset allow to executing political prisoners. Which political prisoners? Just the Palestinian political prisoners. They want to execute them with 39 vote against 12. Meanwhile, this law contradicts two of main basic laws in Israel, that these basic laws should represent the Israeli constitution. So they contradict themselves. It's just a genocide, it's just against the Palestinians. So we must now talk about the rights, the main rights of the Palestinians, to arrive to something. We know it, but we don't found it, the justice. When we found justice, the peace will be realized later. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. We know that there were other fellows who wanted to ask questions, but still we are almost to the end of our panel. So we give the floor to our speakers from round of responses. I think many questions were for Issa, but one question was addressed to all panelists. So we start from Issa and then we.
Okay. I saw the contribution. I saw the questions as contributions. You know, they put a small question with their own speeches, so I appreciate that. It's a smart way. I do it sometimes. Yes, Professor, I agree about your numbers, about how many civilians are killed in Gaza and West Bank and in East Jerusalem and in Lebanon too. You know, this is something very important that we don't forget Lebanon. And why? It's everybody here knows why. It's all together of what you said. Mainly for me, I have a brother with a family, and he's living in Kharkiv, in Ukraine. So the family discuss wars in Palestine, and we discuss wars in Ukraine. So when Russia started attacking Ukraine, we had a family in Ukraine, and we were very afraid about my brother and his family. He has 2 children and Ukrainian wife, and he's there since 30 years. After the war started in Palestine, after I was kidnapped and tortured and sexually assaulted in October 7th by Israeli soldiers and settlers, he called me and asked me to go to visit him in Ukraine and stay and live with him in Ukraine. So a war zone is calling the other people from the other war zone to move, which means a lot, okay? But for me, the Russian war must end. All the people in Ukraine must, you know, be protected, and Ukrainian land must not be divided. This is my opinion, as well as Palestine. Israel worked a lot in the last almost 80 years to dehumanize the Palestinians. They worked hard that people don't see us as a human being. And they still work with their PR machine. Israel, you know, invest a lot of money in the, you know, Israeli military. And the second budget is for their PR. They contribute a lot of money, millions of dollars and euros, about their image. They want to keep the victimhood image, the Western culture image. And even Netanyahu, when he talked about, you know, the war, he said this war is between the civilized people and uncivilized people. He described himself as civilized, and we are not civilized, okay? This is how he talked to international media, and many Israeli officials were saying we are fighting human animals. We are treated as human animals, to be very honest, not from October 7th, from much, much before, and we are treated as if we are not human beings. We are treated as animals for everybody who are seeking shelter and food. Shelter and food, shelter and food, a tent and enough food and enough calories, you know, and they decide how many calories we eat. That's the treatment of the Palestinian people. And they worked hard, the Israeli governments, political party, institutions, and the pro-Israel lobbies here in Europe and in the United States, they worked hard. This is why I said the struggle is between, it's about the land and the narrative. The narrative that Palestinians are human beings. We are a nation who deserve freedom, justice, and equality, and self-determination. I am very happy to meet Professor Mahmoud. You are a genocide survivor from now. This is how you describe yourself. You are a genocide survivor. You survived the genocide. So I'm very happy that we have few professors left. Hundreds of professors in Gaza, they were killed because they are professors, because they are pioneers, because they are good doctors, because they are good engineers, because the Israeli government, their targets were the Palestinian people who are, who may lead the Palestinian society after Hamas regime, and they want to kill everybody who's really may build Gaza again or fight the occupation in a peaceful way. So I have many friends, journalists, engineers, professors, doctors, were killed because they were peaceful. They were killed because they have a PhD or they are the ones who are trying to be change maker. So Professor Mahmoud, thank you very much for your contribution. And we should start using genocide survivors from Gaza from now. And why, again, we are not white. There is a kind of white supremacy. There is some kind of religious, they see, they opened all their doors in Europe here for the Ukrainian, but not for the Palestinians. We don't want to leave for sure, but in the other hand, we are welcomed by the people. The states, they were welcoming the Ukrainian, and it's okay, and they do well. But the people here, I feel welcomed. I feel that many people are changing, and it's about history too of Europe. But what about the United States? It's mainly about the economical loopies and something else very important. Now, the threat in the future, the AI, we were using, we were waiting the AI, the artificial intelligence, and the advanced technologies to help the human being, to make more peace. Unfortunately, I'm an engineer. I know what's going on. They are using the technology to make more wars. There are much more possible wars because of the drones, because of the new technologies, and something else very important about the new war tactics, that you attack civilians. You target civilians to harm the states. You can, stop the services of hospitals. You try to steal the personal data of the people. There is a lot of, attacks, technological attacks on computers, in the highways, on the electricity, on the service chain for people. So we really in a very bad moment about technology. If we don't bring the track back to peacemaking instead of war making, we will be in trouble. What can be done in universities? Your contribution, when I was a student, I was fighting the administration in my university. I was in Columbia University again, and after the encampment, the university shut off all the pro-Palestine movement. I tell the students always, it's not a switch that change. You need to work, network, lobby, campaign, more awareness, not to give up, be more visible, not to lose hope, and be creative how to reach your goals. When I started my activism to reopen my university against the Israeli military closure, who stood in front of me was my administration. What helped me? That I was doing very well in my education. So you have to take care of your education, your knowledge, be rich in your knowledge and experience, then go to your professors and challenge them. So this is something very, very important, and never, ever lose hope. About the NGO, it's Martina's expertise. She can, I think, answer that questions in behalf of all of us, because we don't have time. Sorry for this. Thank you very much.
Yes, I actually do agree that it's profoundly wrong for many NGOs to accept funding from rich families or foundations that made money out of extractivism, fossil fuels, and dirty business. Although many NGOs like mine have an ethical code for access its funding, so we exclude completely any donor that may have done money from fossil fuels, extraction, production, export, arms trade, and whatever. And there is a lot of good business. Okay, so I also agree with you that we should fight capitalism. You know, now the word socialism can be used again after the victory of Mamdani in New York. Still, you know, when making profit is legal and having governments extracting taxes from people is legal, then we should use part of that money for international solidarity to address the needs of people in the most vulnerable communities in the world. Yes, I do think that's the right thing to do. And I do think that NGOs and the UN can make a better use of that money rather than, you know, some of our governments and our companies. When companies intervene directly to do greenwashing, social washing, well, that's dangerous. And hence, I do think there are some dangers in NGOization of human rights work, but they are different from the sources of funding. So yes, let's fight for a more human business. Let's fight for impact investing, you know, investment that has a good social impact, but we cannot renounce to humanitarian work and assistance, even with funding coming from private business. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina and Issa. Maybe the panelists want to conclude on a 1 minute comment. 1 minute, really. You have the floor. Otherwise,
one only comment to Professor Mahmoud and Issa is right. You are a survivor of a genocide. I don't believe there is peace without justice, and I think that this is applicable to every place. In Gaza or to Ukraine, for what it's worth. And on Ukraine, Roberto, I think one of the fear I have is that there is already the attempt to rewrite history. We have seen there was an initiative in CNEL on the 7th of October, actually, where some journalists have started saying, but probably in Gaza there was no famine. And probably in Gaza, nobody has been shot in the head. So I think we have to be very vigilant to make sure that we do not allow the winners to rewrite the history, because that's something that I think civil society have to watch carefully for.
Fernanda, Madiha, you want to say 1 minute comment? No, Fernanda, Madiha. Whatever.
So I agree with Andrea, like human rights and social justice are the way of life. There is no beating around the bush on that. So what we as practitioners, what we as academics, we need to do is we need to make human rights more relatable. We need to make sure that they are not abstract concepts. They're not some very difficult ideas to grasp, but they are just for everybody. They are, as we talk about universality, everybody should be able to access them. And what we can do, we need to hold the multilateral institutions accountable. We need to ask the right questions. We need to question their silence on important issues. And we need to continue our advocacy. And we need to continue showing up for each other. Thank you.
I like the reflection that we got here collectively, that justice is necessary for peace. And I also agree with sort of the spirit of the question that we need more systemic changes. It is not enough to just get funding from the same people that are causing some of these problems. But as a student, I also think that I feel encouraged after this panel. And I think that sometimes when we feel so like frustrated or discouraged, because we stand in this juxtaposition of, well, we're trying to learn, but at the same time, we can question what our institution is doing, or we see like double morality. But I do agree with Issa's point that giving up right now is not an option, but also giving up would only be in service of the oppressor. So I think as students, we just need to keep going and fighting for what we think is necessary and just. Thank you.
You. Thank you very much to our panelists and to the audience. We have a small gift for our panelists, a T-shirt. Is the T-shirt that show it? Then I will give you your. It's the T-shirt that the Human Rights Center designed for the Peace March in Perugia this year. Many of you will recognize a graffiti in Bethlehem in the apartheid war in Bethlehem, and of course, its walls are not just in Palestine, but they are erecting everywhere in the world. So, of course, this is also a wish that we should take everywhere. So, thank you again for your participation, and have a nice day. Thank you, and thank you, Orla, for managing the panel with me.